We live in an unprecedented era of political division. Something has changed in our news coverage. In recent years, our rhetoric has reached such a fever pitch that it threatens the state of our union, nay, the world itself as a whole. I, of course, am referring to whether Rey in the new Star Wars trilogy is a Mary Sue or not. Seriously, what happened to Star Wars? Like a pillow fort at a fictional community college, which should have brought us all together, has torn its fan community violently asunder. Over the past 4 years, the new Star Wars sequel trilogy has caused one half of the internet to accuse the other half of the internet of either blatant misogyny or pushing a political agenda at the expense of Star Wars sequels, both internet crimes punishable by death. I want to make it super clear up front. I know this video doesn't need to exist. No one's dying for another take on a Star Wars movie. It's been over 2 years since The Last Jedi set the internet on fire, and now Rise of Skywalker has also come and gone with a whimper, not a bang, and yet here I am, intent on pushing out late-term commentary with the obliviousness of a great aunt who's just discovered your Facebook profile. So buckle up and pipe down, squirts, and if you're good, maybe when we're done with this trip, Great Aunt Cindy will buy you a Pokemon. What's got a bee in my bonnet? Candidly, it's the coverage. For whatever reason, I feel like everyone has taken positions on either side of the issue with all the nuance of a talking head on a cable TV news show. And while maybe it's easy to attribute ill intent to the toxic agenda of male Star Wars fans, or to imagine Kathleen Kennedy dick dastarding her peach fuzz as she sets a bomb on the train tracks of my nostalgia for the sake of progress, I think those two positions are a false binary. I don't think most Star Wars fans hate the new trilogy because they're misogynist, and I don't think progressive representation is antithetical to a Star Wars movie that the fans would love. And it is this core belief that emboldens me to aspire to, really, what is the end goal of all video essays: to poop on a complete stranger's hard work with what amounts to a loosely researched high school term paper that no one's really asked for. And how does one kick off any self-respecting term paper? Surprisingly, the term Mary Sue was not, in fact, created by a neckbeard incel 4chan moderator named Keith. It actually originated in 1973 by a gal named Paula Smith, who at the time was editor of the Star Trek fanzine Menagerie. Paula satirized unrealistic fanfiction characters by creating a Lieutenant Mary Sue in her satirical short story titled A Trekkie's Tale. By 1976, the magazine written down their official position on why they don't like this kind of character, stating, quote, Mary Sue stories, the adventures of the youngest and smartest ever person to graduate from the academy and ever get a commission at such a tender age, are usually characterized by unprecedented skill in everything, from art to zoology, including karate and arm wrestling. This character can also be found burrowing her way into the good graces / heart / mind of one of the big three, if not all three at once. She saves the day by her wit and ability, and, if we're lucky, has the good grace to die at the end, being grieved by the entire ship. Why is this a bad thing? Wikipedia clarifies. The negative connotation comes from this wish fulfillment implication. The Mary Sue is judged as a poorly developed character, too perfect and lacking in realism to be interesting. Hey guys, do you know what this means? It means that hating Mary Sues isn't hating female characters, it's hating writing. This is true regardless of genitalia. And in order to be an equal opportunity offender, allow me to present an abridged look at the Hall of Shitty Male Mary Sues. But where shitty male representation tends to get balanced out in the zeitgeist, for every Rambo, a John McClane, for every Superman, a Tony Stark, for every Sean Connery James Bond, a literary version of Sherlock Holmes, the gals, for the most part, do not fare nearly as well, and it is not just Rey. Allow me to pull a Kaiser Sose, or a Fight Club, or a Shyamalan, or a Morpheus here, and think back on everything everyone has ever told you that reinforces that neat little narrative of Hollywood's mainstream female representation in recent blockbuster films. Think back to your Trinities and your Wildstyles and your Black Widows and your Foxes and your Alices and your River Tams and your Loves and your Gamoras and your Shuris and your Wasps and your Okoyas and your Captain Marvels. You're noticing kind of like a general trend? I am by far not the first person to bring up the general flatness of the representation of female characters in the vast majority of blockbuster Hollywood films. In the all-around spoilery titled, I Hate Strong Female Characters, Sophia McDougall so insightfully notices that, generally speaking, nowadays all the princesses know kung fu, and yet they're still the same princesses. They're still love interests, still one girl in a team of 5 boys, and they're all kind of the same. They march on screen, punch someone to show how they don't take no shit, throw around a couple of one-liners, or forcibly kiss someone because getting consent is for wimps. And then, with ladylike discretion, they back out of the narrative's way. Their strengths let them briefly dominate bystanders, but never dominate the plot. It's an anodyne, a sop, a Trojan horse. It's there to distract and confuse you so you forget to ask for more. New York Times columnist Karina Chicano gets to the heart of the issue. She points out that the absurdity of the strong female character expectation becomes apparent if you reverse it. Not only does calling for strong male characters sound ridiculous and kind of reactionary, but who really wants to watch them? For my part, I distinctly remember sitting in theaters during December 2015 during The Force Awakens, and the very first time I saw Rey get captured and taken to Starkiller Base. And I didn't care. I specifically remember thinking, oh, no worries. I'm sure she'll figure out a way to free herself. Like, she solved literally every problem in this movie so far on her own. And kick, punch, it's all in the mind. Girlfriend just handles her business. Rey's problem is never competence. Rey's problem is that, except for about 15 minutes in the middle of Rise of Skywalker, aka a little bit too late, Rey's problem is that Rey is never compellingly broken. Rey's never wrong at her core in such a way that she has to transform an arc and have us root for her and stuff. You know, like a character. Like a Kylo Ren. The tragically ironic thing is, I think in their attempt to make Rey so perfect, so capable, so noble, so empowering, I think the producers of Star Wars accidentally made Kylo the secret protagonist of this new trilogy. Unlike Rey, the writers allow Kylo to brood, to fail, to doubt himself, to hesitate, to choose the wrong thing, to be unpredictable. And Adam Driver delivers the hell out of this petulant little sad boy. Without a compelling internal character arc, Rey is a given. Kylo still gets to choose and surprise us. As a result, it's really his trilogy, not Rey's. How much of a shame is that from a representation perspective? Maybe someone out there considers Rey like strong female characters empowering, but I'd offer that's actually subliminated misogyny. Hey Kathleen, if the Force really is female, why don't your Star Wars execs have the gonads to make your female characters as nuanced, flawed, and surprising as the male characters in the same freaking story? We don't need more strong female protagonists, Disney. We need nuanced female protagonists. And regardless of whether you were Team JJ or Team Ryan, that never really was in the cards, was it? Now that Rise of Skywalker is out, we have a pretty good sense of what Kathleen and the boys were trying to do respectively. Rise of Skywalker was 10 pounds of plot in a 5-pound sack that revealed that all JJ really wanted was a weak, shot-by-shot retread of the original trilogy. Rey is Luke, and she discovers that she's descended from a completely different but equally important family of evil space Kennedys. And of course, Ryan, that mad lad, he just wanted to watch the world burn. Neither of these directions feel satisfactory. Neither leads to the kind of nuanced female representation the series so desperately needs. Which is a huge bummer because it was right there. Okay, maybe The Force Awakens played it safe. But in my opinion, out of all of our current blockbuster Hollywood franchises, The Last Jedi was in perfect position to, wait for it,
let the past die.
But Dan, you might say, The Force Awakens was a painfully safe movie and Rey was a painfully perfect protagonist. Doesn't that safe setup predestine the turd salad status of the new trilogy? I don't think so. I think that truly great writers, given perfect freedom, can almost always come after lackluster ones and find a rich vein to mine. And even though JJ did overpower and therefore undercook the character depth of Rey in Episode 7, that movie did give us one thing to mine, one thing we know that Rey wants that she can't give to herself. And that's meaning, purpose, destiny, the identity of her parents. Rey is obsessed with finding her place in all of this, as she puts it. With JJ back at the helm, Rise of Skywalker tries to close that loop, but the execution falls flat. And even if it was executed correctly, it simply would have been a shot-for-shot remake of exactly what happened to Luke in the original trilogy. How could that be fixed? Well, what if, in a parallel timeline, a different kind of Episode 8 started out with Rey training with Luke trying to figure all of this out? And what if the light side had none of those answers for her? And what if Snoke and the dark side could answer all of her questions, show her where she belonged, and give her an important place in their side of history? There was an old Reddit theory years and years ago that Rey and Kylo would switch sides in episode 8. While I don't think that ever could have actually happened for reasons that I'll go into in a minute, I think this would have been by far the best way to go with episode 8 and the trilogy as a whole, purely from an empowered female representation perspective. Crazy to think that we're closing in on 7 years since the finale of Breaking Bad, a show that I and many others would argue is the greatest television show of all time, precisely because of the complexity of its characters. As you probably know, Vince Gilligan originally pitched Breaking Bad to Hollywood executives with one line. This is a story about a man who transforms himself from Mr. Chips into Scarface. This, combined with a fun and advertiser-friendly topic like meth trafficking, meant that everyone in good old Hollywood passed hard, and eventually it got sold to that one random channel that replays old movies and only had one other series in development at the time. Gee, I wonder what that could have been. What's funny is that, in the wake of Breaking Bad's outsized success, there have been a lot of shows that have tried to say, hey, let's do the strong female version of the Breaking Bad gritty anti-hero protagonist thing. And they've all been pretty because they take what I like to call the Zack Snyder approach to storytelling, by which I mean they try to copy-paste the assorted badassery of the feelings we feel about the things we love, while completely missing the story and character choices that made those specific moments powerful. In Breaking Bad's example, the story equation is actually pretty simple. Breaking Bad took a character who'd already captured our hearts, put him in an unfair, philosophical rock and a hard place, and then we watched him make the wrong decisions but for the right reasons, and the writers pulled no emotional punches in the repercussions of starting down that path. Do you see where I'm going with this? What if, instead of what we got with The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, what if Rey's character was arced down a similar path to Walter White's? Well, that plugs so many leaking holes in the Star Wars franchise it should wear wooden shoes and be given Dutch citizenship. I can think of 6 huge improvements it makes just off the top of my head. Number 1, Rey becomes this fascinating, tragic anti-hero we can actually relate to. Number 2, the fact that Rey seems to be the most overpowered character in the galaxy is not lazy protagonist writing. It's a terrifying / impossible threat now facing the Resistance. Number 3, it pulls a complete bait and switch of Rey's character arc and subverts expectations. In this version of the story, while The Force Awakens makes us think that Rey is going to be a gender-swapped retread of Luke's arc, she's actually a much more compelling and relatable version of Darth Vader, except where his reasons for turning to the dark side were specious and shitty.
Love won't save you, Padme. Only my new powers can do that.
Rey's reasons would be extremely relatable and compelling. She just wants meaning and purpose to her existence at any cost. Number 4, think of the layers and levels this choice does to the parallel character arcs in the Kylo-Rey relationship. In episode 7, Kylo sacrifices literally everything that means anything to him in his life in order to try to prove he's mini-me Darth Vader to supersize Gollum. But then in one single costless to her decision to switch sides in episode 8, now Rey would effortlessly occupy that Sithy role better than he ever could. Number 5, this simple shift in the story doesn't just fix the Rey problem, it also offers Kylo a fascinating, cohesive direction. Specifically, isn't it kind of weird that in The Last Jedi, Kylo makes this fascinating speech about both sides, join me, only to 180 on literally everything he's just said maybe 30 seconds later after he's rejected by Rey, with no additional screen time devoted to, what would make him bail on his core foundational beliefs? In the new Rey gets turned to the dark side, Kylo gets kicked to the curb by Snoke version of the throne room scene in my fictional episode 8, Kylo's accidentally become literally the only person in the galaxy who knows what has just happened and how the good guys are. But he's literally burned his bridges with literally everyone with a motivation from stopping what is about to happen and would be trusted by no one. And I don't know, maybe he still thinks that both sides represent a false binary. But now he has no choice but to head back to talk to Mom when the balance is so out of whack when Rey sides with Snoke. Like any great film noir protagonist, Kylo becomes the ultimate reluctant hero. The wrong hero, but also the right hero, because he's the only hero the good side's got in the fight. And ultimately, he's also the only character with the correct life mileage to convincingly redeem Rey in the final film. He's literally been in her shoes before. Finally, number 6, taking a big step back and looking at everything on a meta level. The symmetry this change builds is skincare spokesperson flawless. We all know that George loves Star Wars stories to echo each other.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
You can say what you want about episode 7. The spectrum of opinion ranges from it's a soft reboot of episode 4 all the way over to it's a shot-for-shot remake of episode 4. But if episode 8 started out the exact same way as essentially a soft reboot of Empire, but then they actually had Rey say yes at the end of the climax of her join me speech with Snoke, Rian Johnson would have simultaneously made an uncanny echo to the trilogy of the past while also making the single most subverting audience expectations choice possible. After that, go ahead, redeem Rey at the end of episode 9. Make everyone feel warm and fuzzy. Teddy bear's picnic for everybody. It still would have been a revolutionary story arc from a representation perspective. Even more important though than just being subversive, which we can be honest is a bullshit reason, this single change fixes both sides of the internet's problem with Rey by addressing every Mary Sue concern midstream in the trilogy with a fix that transforms and somehow honors the Star Wars mythos that came before it, while simultaneously elevating Rey into a complicated, compelling character on the level of a Walter White or Darth Vader who just happens to be female. Now, I'm not a dummy. We all know this story arc was never a viable option. Economic factors mean that a big corporation like Disney would never take the storytelling risk like letting Rey fall to the dark side. They need Rey to be a hero so they can sell action figures, as soon as they remember to put them in stores or whatever. But you know what? Look at that. That's not evidence against either side in our original debate. That's a complaint about corporate commercialism. Fans of diverse representation, fans of good Star Wars movies, I think we're on the same side here. I should probably also take a moment and make it clear that I am not saying that every female protagonist in every major Hollywood blockbuster has wafer-thin characterization. We've also seen the opposite of that. Thick biscuits, if you will. That's the kind of representation we have to demand from Hollywood, male or female, progressive executive or rabid fan. Together. Allow me to say it again. I don't think most Star Wars fans hate the new trilogy because they're misogynist, and I don't think progressive representation is antithetical to a Star Wars movie that the fans would love. Why am I ending my video by restating my thesis statement? Partially because I honestly think it is true, and I think our conversations on progress would get a lot farther if our starting places included attributing good motives to each other. But more importantly and more honestly, I restate my thesis because it's literally the only way I'm allowed to end this damn thing. Remember, this is an unwanted high school term paper after all.